Hello and welcome to the October 8th edition of the Conformance Office Hours, a sub-project of SIG architecture. I already have the meeting notes shared. If you could please add your details to the attending list, that would be super duper. We already have a pretty full agenda, so we'll just kind of start and have at it. The first one is the follow-up on action items that we had from last time. The first item we have listed here is the next steps for deprecation of the pod template API. You're on mute, API. Still on mute.
There you go. I haven't had a chance to follow up with John, but if John's on, this is something we wanted to just check on.
John, any update with regards to deprecation of the pod template API?
You know what? It turns out some people are using it, so I don't even know if we want to deprecate it, but there hasn't been any discussion of it beyond that, as far as I know. Are you talking to me or John Starkey?
You.
Shopify, I just saw that.
Yeah. You know, it's that you put something out there, people will start to use it, even if you don't want them to.
Does that mean we should add it to conformance because it's stable and in use by people?
Typical modus operandi for large sweeping changes that are API-driven things that people might be dependent upon is to send a detailed description that outlines the issue to the devel list and point them at the issue so that you can give feedback. I don't think that that would be a bad idea in this case, so you can get broad consensus. So outline the problem statement. We have an API that was intended, that never should have seen the light of day, live on in perpetuity longer than it's supposed to have. And then outline the reasons why you want to deprecate it, and et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, there's no implementation behind it, as far as I know, right? It's just a way to store something, but I don't know if that's a justification for completely deprecating it if people are using it.
Well, I think outlining the problem statement and the proposed solution, as well as asking for feedback on the issue, is a reasonable approach. Yeah. Does that sound like a plan?
It sounds like a plan. We'll put this is the AI here, and I'll assign that to myself.
Next up, John, action item, the KEP for BDD tooling.
Yeah, so I just wanted to have the discussion around, I know you'd said looks good enough, and put a hold on it just for timeout. I did just push a small tweak to it because there was some confusion here about sort of the level of expectations of what's supposed to come out of this tooling, which is the KEP maybe was setting the expectations higher than I think is reasonable. We put in, the expectations aren't very high, right? It's a seed for a list that you will curate, that's all.
Sorry, what is BDD?
Behavior-driven development.
Gotcha.
Really, this is behavior-driven. Basically, the KEP is to separate out the list of what conforming behaviors are from the tests that evaluate those behaviors, so that we can improve them independently, and we can have a punch list of the expectation here is that you can list the behaviors with much less effort than you can build tests for those behaviors. So you can essentially list the behaviors, have a punch list of things that you want to cover, and you can get a better measure of your coverage, as well as your task list. And you can independently approve those. So basically, you say this is how we expect Kubernetes should behave, whether you actually have a test for it or not yet. So
Sure.
the AI here is just, do we have sufficient lazy consensus for timeout that we can just merge it? I've got.
I am in the camp that says we don't have anything there yet, so I'm totally okay with getting something in place and then reviewing and iterating and refining the CAP and the POC from that point. Because right now it's vaporware.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
I think it's totally fine to just get rolling. So anything to get the ball moving would be good.
Okay, yeah. Jeffrey here has sort of done a little bit around that tooling and generating a list of behaviors. So I'm going to go through and kind of curate one, and we'll see what it looks like. So we'll get something for people to kind of look at and build some I don't know knowledge. Start to iterate, as you said. We'll just start with PodSpec.
Sounds good. Are there any other questions there? Going once, twice, 3 times. Hippie, I muted you because you're super loud typing, so you have to unmute again.
I've been trying to implement a detection of keyboard press to auto mute input. That's not happening yet because the microphone. I can pick it sits right between my keyboard. Right here.
So action item was to find space and details for a face-to-face at KubeCon. I saw that you got a meeting set up, and I believe John and you are the hosts or whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
And free to let us know if you want to update the agenda on that.
Okay.
So the other thing I want to mention on that, we also got space in the contributor summit. It's not showing on the schedule right now because we just need to tweak the schedule a bit. But basically, the idea there is a little bit of a recruitment effort. So that's more around presenting to the current contributors about the conformance program, about what it's for, about how they can contribute both from a reviews point of view and as they move their things to GA, what they need to do. So right now that's also on Hippie, and I'm willing to assist there as well, or if somebody else is interested in working on it, that's fine too. So that'll be a 25-minute. Well, right now there's 25 minutes is probably what that'll be. But if we can do it in 15, that's better.
Is that before the whole the separate breakout sessions, the longer sessions?
So there's multiple tracks along the contributor. There's multiple rooms. So this is in sort of there's a room, the main track kind of thing. So we have in there 3 things for SIG Arch. We have the 25-minute vision session. We have a 25-minute conformance session, and I'm going to do a prod readiness thing for 25 minutes. And I can show you that schedule if you want to see what. Well, I don't know.
If you just paste a link in here, I can take a look at it.
Yeah. Okay. The schedule doesn't reflect the conformance thing right now. I'm giving 25 minutes from my prod readiness thing, and so the schedule will be updated with that. But it'll show both sessions.
Right. I can help with that. Leading up to the contributor summit, I'm going to probably offload a lot of my current work items to just focus on doing slides because I have many things I have to do for KubeCon. So I'd probably be able to help there so long as it doesn't overlap with my other SIG cluster lifecycle responsibilities.
In the summit?
At the contributor summit, yes.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have to look. Yeah, we'll have to look at the schedule.
Next up was an action item for me to broaden the reviewer pools and start to do the public admonishment / call to arms. I did an initial call as Matt and other people were stepping down and other people were trying to step up. into the SIGARCH space. But I don't necessarily know if there's a lot of people who are actually going to be able to do the hard work. So I was going to write a longer email about a problem statement and the importance of it, as well as what we've been witnessing over time. So half of which is going to be not explicit admonishment, but like a little bit of a, hey, we haven't been doing the best of job here with keeping up with our test automation apparatus. And then the second part is going to be, this is really important. We should really start to focus some of our effort and energy there. And what I'm going to try to also do is figure out what's the stick philosophy. Like, it's one thing to make public statements. It's another thing to have some type of policy enforcement.
Yeah, so I have a few comments on that. One, in general, part of the reason for getting that time in the summit was for this recruitment thing. But we can also, I think, talk about the stick. Another thing is the part of the prod readiness is a part of what will come out of that is more tooling around enforcing certain criteria be met when you're going to GA. So one of those criteria can be the conformance tests, and so more of a tooling that's going to say, hey, you actually can't promote until you get this checklist completed and approved by the appropriate people. And so that could potentially be a place where we can insert some leverage.
Yeah, I think we should just basically give them the heads up that, like, we will be enforcing this much tighter, and we will be grabbing data and going to SIGs with that data.
That's fine, but I think without tooling, it's going to be a never-ending battle, a losing battle. So
I agree. So that's my tentative plan. I was gonna try to rally this around KubeCon time. In fact, I originally wrote my talks were originally around the tragedy of the commons and how to avoid those pitfalls. So I got plenty of fodder there. So if you're interested in helping on that effort, please let me know.
So Tim, do you think that should be what we talk about in the summit in that spot? So we have two times for conformance, right? We've got one in the summit, one in the maintainers track of the main conference. That's really our face-to-face thing. So during that contributors summit, I mean, that's the audience we want to reach, right?
It is, yes. So I think having the pre-problem statement announced and then having here's what you can do to help out at the contributor summit would also be good.
Okay.
Next up, action item test not showing up in user agent. I don't know who's that.
That was something that we noticed as I think it was Jeffrey was trying to promote or create a test, and he noted that there were already existing tests, and we weren't seeing them because they were Node and EDE tests. So we needed to copy those over, and I think there is a current promotion in place. I'm not sure if it's.
So what give you the follow up on that? Hippie, and maybe Tim already is aware of this because he's involved in the testing a lot. Mm-hmm. The node tests are split into two. The node end-to-end tests are split into sort of two categories. One are the ones that run against a cluster, and one are ones that don't need a whole cluster and just need a node. And right. So, and there's a set of tests that are shared between them. The conformance tests and the things we've been measuring are really just about things running against a cluster. So yep. What Jeffrey did is there were some tests that already existing, but they were currently only running against a node without a real cluster.
Right.
And so he just moved some of those tests into that common area so that they're run in both places, and then they'll start to show up and they're available for promotion.
I think there's going to be more that we'll need to move over. It sounds good, like we should document that as well. So we should probably document that and ensure that that PR gets merged. If there's anything, like if that's not on the board today to see what's blocking that, that would be great.
Just a reminder that if you want to have things reviewed faster, do the /assigns, because I only use a set of bots. I ignore everything else that's just CC me, because my GitHub notifications are a doomsday device.
We'll do that.
All right, next up. Add release, feature gate, required and deprecated field metadata.
That's done. This again, we're going through our action items. Lava Lamp was the one with some feedback that we already have something sort of going, and I wanted to know exactly how we operated it. Liggett gave us the info, and I've kind of set it down for now. Not been high priority, but the action item is there. So I want to make sure we followed up. Everything else at the end of the action items that I captured from last meeting.
All right. It looks like most of these next items here are used. If you want to walk through.
Sure. The first thing is where we do have API Snoop cncf.io is up with current data from this morning. The one thing that made me sad was that the numbers went down. And you can see the dates over the past roughly 2-week periods, other than this last one's about a week. And what we may have not have noticed or explained from last time, because usually I find their increase and there's not enough time for me to figure out why before the meeting. But we had promotion of admission webhook and custom resource definitions was the largest part of the increase. You can see that the, the number of conformance hits is about the same, but the conformance hits actually goes up from 100 all the way to 124. But one thing I haven't explained for this week is we have a drop. And there's no changes in, like we didn't have any promotions or new conformance tests in the last 7 days or 8 days. But we did have these endpoints that are no longer hit. And there's some links down here under, as the test didn't change, that made clear maybe something in the framework changed. But there's the 2 links, one from a week ago for specifically focusing on app controller revision, and one at the same endpoint, there's 0 tests hitting it. I don't have an explanation yet, but if there's anyone who noted any changes in how the framework works, because the tests themselves didn't change, but possibly something shared between all those tests may have changed. And this, go ahead.
There were some namespace cleanup work that has been removed. So like, because it's no longer necessary. So there was a weird bit of code that existed for cleanup at the end of a job to clean up namespaces. And that's the only thing that has been modified that I'm aware of that can make this type of impact. There was one other sweeping change, but I don't think it would affect this. That was the large change by Patrick with regards to vendoring and updating Ginkgo Omega and some other before and after details.
I mean, looking at that specific list there, I see beta things. I see things that pod template. I see things like auto scaling that are not subject to conformance at this point. Are back, right? So I'm a little confused.
Well, what's interesting here is that these are hit by conformance tests.
So they're incidentally hit.
They're incidentally hit, but they do affect performance hit overall, and I think I'll have to check on those.
I mean that's kind of one of our tests are supposed to be clean, so that when you run a conformance test, it doesn't implicitly test things that are not conformance. And so this is an indicator that they're not really clean, and we probably, if they're coming out of the framework, that's still a problem, but we probably need to understand it better.
Well, currently these are all removed, so they're no longer.
Those are the ones that came out that are no longer there.
Came out, so we can look at it as a good thing, but I'm looking at the number, particularly conformance hits, the number of endpoints we hit. So while that may be 16 long, only 6 of them are beta or alpha. The rest are stable. And so we had 10 of these.
Stable is not sufficient, right? Our back is not, at this point, subject to conformance because it's optional, right? It's not just alpha or beta, it's also optional or required.
Yeah, I think with that list, it's all list operations, right? So it's basically, it looks like a cleanup portion. And if you notice that they're all namespaced, I'm guessing this has to do with Clayton's change to remove a section of portions of code that we had with namespace cleanup that was like super legacy.
Oh, listing everything in the namespace and then going and deleting it instead of just deleting it.
Exactly, right?
And spot on.
And stuff like this, like if we wanted to add just basic operations, we should be able to just use the dynamic client. If you want to get like raw, larger coverage, you could have a set of operations which is basically just list and watch generic set of tests across the entire state space of the dynamic client. And that would increase your coverage significantly and hit freaking every resource type. So
it would increase the current way of measuring coverage.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
I've got another item for that further down the list.
All right, let's keep moving. I don't think this is a big problem.
No, just wanted to note because it went down. Everybody's like, we want to see it up into the right, and we dipped. So we did have a really huge increase in what's going to get us to the point of automation for gating and PRs. We were taking 30 minutes on a bunch of cores to use regular expressions to map in all of our usually 300,000 or more audit events per job to the right operation ID. And we went through and looked at some code pointed to us by Lava Lamp and I think Lig as well on how the API server itself does the mapping on incoming URLs requests. And yeah, that got us to 10 seconds. So that was a major increase in speed. This will allow us to look into at least commenting and doing those initial steps on automation for requesting that people get approval from the right folks, or blocking it or something. I don't know what exactly we'll do, but that's part of the next around the KEP for a non-required prowl job later. The next part is the API Snoop Watch coverage metrics. One of the major areas, the first one being pod spec, and then the second one being watch. This was how many operations have a watch parameter and how many of them are tested and how many are conformance tested. So we have really low watch coverage. But as Timothy said earlier, there's a way where we can get this to increase fully by using the dynamic client. And I thought it might be good to capture some of the links or documentation or suggestions that Timothy had with regards to increasing that, and getting a quick feedback. Do those numbers look about right for the number of watchable things?
I guess it does seem about accurate. If you were to swag it, it doesn't seem out of the realm of normalcy, because those are basically what are the resource objects that you are watching.
So we have, like, I think a couple of little tests around watching, maybe config maps or something. As I understand it, there are things that each resource has to do in order to properly implement all of this stuff. So it would be useful to have a suite that we could point and iterate over all the the resources and validate the functionality of each of those resources, around watch in particular. Similar to what Tim's saying already about the dynamic client.
Is there any specific guidance on dynamic client in that step? I've tried to go through we've had conversations before and I'm trying to capture it succinctly. And I thought it might be useful to spend just a little bit of time what we do with the dynamic client as far as creating an object of, like for each of these, underneath these operations, there will be a particular kind, Kubernetes kind. And if we're talking about dynamically looking through the API server for the available kinds and then instantiating a kind and then creating a watch on it, I wasn't really clear on the flow through for that.
I mean, it may not be feasible to do that in an automated way, right? Because you don't know all the values you have to provide in order to actually create the resource successfully.
So you can use the dynamic client to do this by by basically instantiating a single object, and because every resource object has an object meta, you can mutate the object meta without knowing the full details of the kind. So using the dynamic client, you could basically update the name or update any of the object meta fields of the resource type. So this allows you to basically walk the entire kind list that exists, create an informer on that kind, create one with an object meta of, foo for name, and change the name to bar, and verify that bar was the update that you see in the watch, right? And that the incantation or delta gets changed across. Now, ideally, you'd have some other data for your kinds, and maybe you had some templating around it to make it more real, right, than that. But you could get raw coverage increase for your different resource types just by doing that alone.
So recently there was a change, where you can separately watch meta from the resource itself, I believe. I don't know if that means that a different code path.
No, I mean, like, knowing what I know about the API server and the etcd code in the back end, a watch is a watch down to the resource type itself. So you're going all the way down to it's almost like a folder down in etcd in the resource object itself. So if you're doing a list watch against that using the informers, you're going to touch a whole section of code inside the API server specific for that incantation for that resource kind. So it's going to hit the entire, I believe inside the code for the API server a long time ago, it used to be called the registry, which is like all the different resources and how they get stored into etcd. You'd be exercising all those code paths.
Okay.
Thanks for that clarification, Timothy. We'll hopefully come back next time and see the total, at least tested parameters pop up a bit if we can get a test in. And if it's not merged, I'm going to see if we can't start generating for this particular PR what the increase would be, so we can see where to prioritize our PR merging. On the next one, this is, I think we're about ready for the KEP, for the, not a requirement yet, but at least for a proud job that will comment when conformance coverage decreases, so that we can actually document what it looks like, how we're measuring conformance outside, without having to look at the API Snoop code, and also having a standard place where this is documented, where the current set of conformance, like the front of API Snoop's page, or how we're documenting it. Because we have really 3 different ways that we're looking at. One is the watch coverage metrics, which are just should be simply and removed soon. We've got our endpoint metrics, And then we've got our more complex pod spec coverage metrics, and eventually some behavior coverage metrics. Due to the speed up where we just had for the current metrics for API operations, we could have detected when the PR from Clayton's namespace changed, dropped our current coverage metrics, and at least had a conversation and known at that time, oh, the namespace cleanup now means these other things aren't being hit, and maybe we should start testing them in a different way. So that's an AI on me, but I'd welcome any feedback on that.
I think it's long overdue. Yes, please.
It's back to that stick, right?
Yeah, that's the stick. Like without that, we have no enforcement. Right?
The other thing that after we'll work on creating the stick in this next 2-week sprint for us. We've in general had help from John and from Timothy when we ping them directly. But we're still, like you said, the number of people that actually respond to our requests for helping to look at code is low. And for the things where we're trying to promote the test or slightly change or modify an existing test, the amount of pushback is really high. And so we keep modifying the docs. So when you look at these PRs that Devin and Caleb have been working on, I like that we're updating the documentation a lot. I'd also like to find a smoother way to where we're increasing coverage by writing more tests instead of
A part of this, like when you write new tests, they're owned by the SIG, so you have to work with the SIG in question to make sure that they have bandwidth, and the problem with SIGs is that they're not all equal, right? Yeah. So if there are enough reviewers, if there are enough people, they will make sure they prioritize it accordingly, right? And if there aren't enough people and they're overbooked and they might have different priorities, they won't treat this as a high priority item. So awareness is part of your problem, right? It has nothing to do with whether or not this effort here is horizontal, but not everybody is aware of it, especially if you're working across something like Signode, right? With regards to the limit range one, I already commented. I commented back in September 3rd, like right away. So long as I'm assigned, I will eventually get to it within a week. That's my standard turnaround time because I have certain days of the week where I can devote towards just triaging my own backlog. But the comment still holds, and I think part of the problem here is not just getting feedback, but soliciting understanding of what is the problem statement that you're trying to accomplish. Here's why it's important. And then here's what we're going to do about it, and does this make sense? Right? And I think part of that has been missing. So if I look here, the PR was submitted to do X, but the problem statement is missing. And how you go about it and why is also missing. So it's very concrete to me when doing this particular review. I see what you're trying to do. I disagree with this approach. So if we agreed upon the problem statement in the beginning, it would probably be a lot less pushback, right? So part of this is having to do a well-defined distributed pipeline in an open source project is, one, agree upon the problem statements, make sure that they're concrete and actionable, and that when you go about executing against said problem statement, that it's clear that it's in there's somewhat agreement on the how, right? Not to the nth degree, because sometimes people can have creative ways of solving it. Some people might be highly opinionated. That'll vary widely on the SIG, right? But this individual problem state was ambiguous, right? Other ones, they should be a little bit less ambiguous, but you don't actually have the coverage, or you don't have the person to review it. So what might be even more beneficial before we start to do this is to have here's the contributor guide to helping you make your tests. We have like how to write good tests, but like it's really a people problem, right? It's a shared state, space, and understanding and a people problem. So step one, write an issue and make sure you get buy-in from the people who are going to be the reviewers. Make sure that the problem statement for the issue is well defined. Step two, make sure that they have bandwidth to review. Step three, submit the PRs and get on the backlog. And step four is going to be hound. For better or for worse, the project itself is under-resourced because it's not just under-resourced in general, it's under-resourced globally. So we have some other people too have their own agendas. So this might not be a higher priority agenda item for them. The question we're going to have to face is how do we make it a higher priority agenda item for them? But going back to the original statement I made, there's multiple parts here. I think one of the key fundamental parts is having a well-defined path for you that eliminates the friction. And that well-defined path is write a well-defined issue before you submit the PRs and make sure you get buy-in from the SIG in question before you submit the PRs. Otherwise, it could just sit there for a long time.
That's great feedback. Thank you, Tim. I put some notes on contributor guide to writing tests, like stuff that's maybe not super clear there as far as the simple steps. Number one, get the well-defined issue and problem statement defined. Well-defined issue. Number two, get some agreement on how to resolve the problem, then create the PR, then hound folks. By the way, it's a people problem with a shared space, shared state space. Yeah, which will be the 6. And we'll incorporate this into the contributor guide to writing tests as well, since that's, if it's not as clearly defined there, we'll make sure that those are like checkboxes basically.
Yep. Because I think that'll eliminate a lot of your friction.
Thank you.
Are there specific bits, like ignoring the limit range, because I commented on that?
Sure.
The replica set pod quota, or the kubelet one, you're just having a large turnaround time from the SIG node folks.
Yeah.
You might have more sway, John, than I do. I don't know if you can poke somebody in the eye there.
Yeah, I mean, I can poke somebody here about this if you assign this to me, but I think that in general, like maybe as part of what we're talking about, the email you're talking about doing, Tim, and I think we want to see if we can convince the SIGs to designate 1 or 2 people as a point of contact for conformance test promotion and development from each SIG. I think that would be, even if they don't have the time to review everything, that at least we have it within the SIG at that point. That might be a helpful process. I mean,
yeah. What I will do is I will draft a document instead of writing an email right away. I'll draft a document and try to, as an action item for me, for next time, for us to walk through a proposed way of improving this.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because things like scheduling, Tim, you can approve, right? And you know, different networking things I can approve, but you know, when it comes to Node, it's poke this person or any other SIG. It would be nice to have somebody designated.
Yeah, and API machinery is a lot of stuff, and they're way overbooked.
Yeah.
So. So the kubelet one, I would say suggest John to maybe federate, maybe assign him. Replica set pod quota limit,
Thanks for being our advocate there, John.
Mm-hmm.
I need to take New Zealand gifts and try to make friends in all the SIGs.
I'll take this one. So also too, if you are waiting for too long, you can poke me to try and route as well. So if I'm assigned, what will happen to me is it'll eventually show up on my Gubernator board, and this is my source of truth. Right, I do things in priority order to Gubernator. If you poke me on Slack, I will not necessarily address your issue. I will do things in priority order of Gubernator, because you're not like, if a person pokes me, it's not like I don't have enough things going on, right? I have a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of people poking me, so I'm going to do it whatever priority order it comes in. So that's how I kind of sort the backlog.
But just up for my own edification. So when you say priority order, I mean the Gubernator doesn't have any kind of priority here, right? This is just sorted by up-to-date status. When you say
I go by date, so like usually I go back up from bottom up. So if it's been languishing the longest, I try to address those first. So it's typically time-based sorted.
I see.
But for me, it'll be a weekly.
I do have a comment on the split.
Go ahead. I can barely hear you.
I do have a comment on the split limit range test, if we have time for that. So the reason why it's kind of been sitting back and forth is I see your comment about disagreeing with breaking up the function into multiple it blocks. And I think that we could have definitely clarified in the initial PR comment the intention. If you see in my first comment addressing your comment, on September 4th, it links to the original PR for promoting this test, which was closed because SpiffXP, Aaron, felt like the test had too much things going on with it, and he was the one who suggested just replace the buys with its, essentially, or to split it in some way. So my point with bringing this up is this is not the only case where we've had, somebody saying, okay, well, you can't promote this because X reason. Change it this way, then try to promote it again. We try to make the change, and someone else comes in and says, well, hey, this is not the right way to change it. So typically, we try to, at that point, either update conformance docs or point to them as backup, and it gets to a point where we start to wonder if the test is too expensive.
This particular, the idea of adding multiple its, the reason why it doesn't make sense. Okay, let me at least illuminate that piece so we can have clarification there. When you have a described limit range, you're basically saying the limit range should do something by doing something else, right? And the problem with breaking up the individual its is that you have a conflating state space of problems that don't apply to one another. It's doing something to try and get in to test this in a behavioral by fashion. So you'd be saying here that your test is a limit range. It should create a pod with no resource limits. That's not a limit range test. That's a test, it's doing something in order to test the limit range. It's doing this extra work along the way. So that's why it's a by, not an it.
So preparation. It's preparation for the test.
Exactly. So your actual test is it should create a limit range, right? So that's the reason why I'm saying it doesn't make any sense to do it to break apart in its, right? So concretely, this specific breaking apart doesn't make sense because the way the suite is structured and organized, it wouldn't make sense to the reader who's trying to organize the set of tests by the descriptions or the its that are there. So that's concretely why I said no, this is not the way we should do it. Now, that being said, some of these tests, that makes sense. Some of these tests, that's the specific test. some of these tests are really long, right? And I do think they should be factored. The question is how we factor them. Could be probably broken up into a set of like smaller, discrete functions. And I think that's a general statement that could probably apply to a bunch of tests. And when he says it's very busy, it is very busy. Like the test is too long in my book. But I think if it was broken up into well-factored functions, each function doing a set of concrete steps, I think it'd be easier to read and it would make a lot more sense. Does that help clarify it?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
I'm going to add an AI here for these general descriptions like this, what we've learned here, because this is I don't think this is captured anywhere, and it is, as you said, generally good, and particularly on how we do our grouping of our buys within the describes when we get to init, what that should look like. It's kind of described in BDD in general, but more specifically making sure it's there in the guide.
Yep. Any other questions with regards to these tests? So the action item here is that John will poke someone who's still working on Kubelet at Google. I will take a look at the pod quota one, and we gave feedback about limit range. Any other questions there, or should we go on to the?
You assigned me to that one, right? The Kubelet one.
Let's take a look. No, you're not assigned. I haven't seen Dawn working on Kubelet stuff in months. I know she's working on other things nowadays.
She's always busy. She's still on a lot. Yeah, we still have people here, team here.
Right. Next up, Srini.
Yeah, essentially, it's a very general thing that I want to discuss here. So I did some CSI validation test suites before, so recently I should have closed them, but general problem is that storage is looking for a way to identify a subset of the test to be close to conformance or validation suite, whatever we call it. And I told Michelle, I was talking to Michelle Tsao last week, and I told her that I would like to help. And the thing is, I'm looking for a direction here. Essentially, should I target it as like, you know, API coverage for CSI? They have created these test suites currently, which are like, you know, kind of like table tests. So that's not going to work if you want to basically split the tests into. Should I go with coverage wise, or since there is a CSI spec, should we go with the BDD? It's general discussion and direction that I need.
Well, so this is kind of a general class of problems that we've made little to no progress in the last year of how to handle these kind of pluggable surface areas from a point of view of conformance. I do have it on my list of things I want to get some agreement from this group in the next cycle, next quarter or so, on how we proceed with those things. But I don't have. Go ahead, Tim.
But what I see is a general, you know, we have storage as an experimentation that we can try and see.
Yeah, that's
well.
good.
But for us to even go there, what will be our first set of steps to do, right?
So right now there's, if you go back to like the actual tests themselves, example here is the limit range test. The storage tests are currently classified with the describe, for all of them, right? So you have the whole regex moniker you can hit for that whole suite. Now you can modify the describe, or you can have a set of tests underneath the whole umbrella of storage that would be like some set of features or some level of verification / validation to use some tag. That's the only other option for doing regexes across the tests. Obviously, there's probably some things in storage that you don't want to hit, I'm guessing. Is that true?
That is also true. Basically, there is one default storage driver, host path driver that they will expect to be existent. So all the tests that are done on that driver will be the ones should be run, so that we can have a consistent environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like host path that's not provider dependent, we can probably move and promote to conformance. But I think that, I guess maybe I'm making it more difficult. I was getting back to the discussion of profiles and how we can classify a set of functionality and say, this set of, we want a cluster built by some provider to be able to meet this set of functionality regardless of the driver they use, right? So deciding what that functionality is still kind of the only thing we've talked about doing 3D, like we talked about in a meeting a few weeks ago, is maybe we can tag tests with enough information that we can do an analysis of what providers support those levels of features, so we can try and build some sort of factor analysis to determine the feature sets.
Right.
I mean, some big ones we can pretty easily say, but there's persistent volumes in general, but then there's how many different flavors there. It's a little tricky.
True. I agree with that. I mean, essentially, any tests that run on host path should be able to be run on any other driver that customer has in their environment, right? So
if I take a step back before we bike shed too deeply here, is that something of that nature should have a KEP written for it, right? Like I've been writing a bunch of KEPs lately. This is clearly something where having explicit set of goals and non-goals would help to frame the conversation. So like, what exactly are you trying to accomplish, and with what team, and when and how? What's the motivation? What are the goals? What are the non-goals? And then we can start to talk about the logistics of that. But if you frame the conversation first by concretely saying, what is the motivation? What is the time frame? What are the goals? What are the non-goals? That'll help us to sort of steer the conversation versus, this is pretty open-ended, right? We could talk about this at length about bike shed and multiple ideas of approaching this problem.
Which is what we've done for the last year, right?
Yeah, exactly. I want to prevent this from doing it again.
Yeah.
So the answer, I think, would be to have an initial KEP that we can rally discussion on.
That's a good idea.
So this is the KEP that belongs to conformance. I don't even know whether this group of tests will be targeted towards conformance, but it's targeted towards testing standard functionality, right? I mean, we might call it as profile at some point in time, but generally.
Yeah, I think just defining what you're trying to do and writing a well-defined proposal on it, I think would be generally useful. And KEPs are explicitly written for things that cut across SIGs or to get people on the same page. So you're going to cut across storage and potentially conformance. So that makes sense.
Am I recording it correctly that the next step is a KEP? And do we have someone that's wants that?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, I think in my mind, the cap that we want to write is around the general class of problem, how we're going to manage profiles or optional sets of, or not even optional, but pluggable sets of functionality within the conformance framework. But I'm not sure that's what Srini is actually asking for here. So I don't know if there's a different cap for what Srini wants here, or what do you think, Srini?
Yeah, I think we don't want to go into that circle of rediscovering validation suites or something like that, right? I mean, your point is what my problem right now. So,
right. I mean, I think that Tim's suggestion is a good one. That if we have a cap, like what we had before for validation suites, Quentin just closed it, was just a PR and some discussion, and but it was a PR specifically modifying a particular document, set of policies and guidance. And maybe we need a little bit broader approach and a little bit more organizing of the effort around goals, non-goals, and scoping, constraining the scope appropriately or defining the scope appropriately. I don't know. I think it might be just a more fruitful way to approach the problem than what we've done in the past.
Yeah. Should we have a discussion? I can set up a
I don't think a discussion is. Somebody needs to take point on a design doc on a cap, like Srini, and whether that be you or someone on SIG Storage that's helping to work on these tests that wants them. I think that's the appropriate action path here, because like we have a lot of conversations. That's kind of the problem. We need to have a more written culture versus oral culture.
So if I understand this correctly, I mean, from the storage point of view, my problem is basically identifying this test suite, which is general enough, right? From the conformance point of view, I need better agreement on whether this general test suite should belong to conformance or a validation suite or whatever we call it. So those are two different goals in there. So I can iterate. I can start off with the document, iterate with you and John, and see where we end up on the storage folks. So.
Yeah, I mean, I know Michelle and I have talked about this in the past, like for months, right? I mean, we haven't talked in a couple months, but like I think almost at least 6 months ago, we talked about the idea of doing this kind of thing, but it's never resulted in a concrete document that's describing what exactly we're going to do, and therefore concrete action that comes out of that document. So definitely, I'd be happy to iterate with you on that, and bring in Michelle when we need to. I think I don't think I have bandwidth to,
I can
on it.
Right? That sounds good. I mean, I can start off and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right, folks, we're at time and I have a hard stop, so.
You too. Thank you.
All right, thanks.